Hey guys, welcome back to Sleeping Stone Whispers. Tonight's story gently explores how royal vacations were less about adventure and more about staying indoors, resting in quiet rooms, watching light move across walls, and letting time pass without purpose. If you enjoy slow, calm storytelling designed to help your mind unwind and drift into sleep, this peaceful journey through still palaces is made just for you. Settle in, get comfortable, and allow the silence of history to carry you into rest. If this kind of quiet storytelling helps you relax, please like the video, subscribe to Sleeping Stone Whispers, and join us again for more gentle nights. The idea of a royal holiday was never loud. It did not arrive with trumpets or packed schedules, and it did not promise excitement or movement. Instead, it formed slowly, like a thought that appeared only after everything else had been set aside. For kings and queens, rest was not about going somewhere new, but about remaining still in a place already known. A royal holiday usually began as a gentle suggestion. There would be no announcement, no visible change in the rhythm of the palace. Life simply softened. Duties were postponed, audiences delayed, and expectations lowered until the days felt lighter, though nothing visibly changed. The same walls remained. The same corridors stretched quietly from one end of the palace to the other. In these times, the palace did not become lively. It became quieter than usual. Doors closed more often. Curtains were drawn just enough to filter the light, not to block it, but to make it slower. Sunlight entered rooms in thin, patient lines, resting on carpets and polished floors without urgency. Royal holidays were rarely about leaving. Travel required planning, movement, and attention, things that worked against rest. Instead, the idea of staying indoors felt safe and complete. Everything necessary was already there: familiar rooms, well-worn chairs, tables shaped by years of use. Nothing needed to be discovered. On the first day of such a holiday, mornings arrived without instruction. No bells rang early. No schedules waited to be followed. A king might wake and remain still, listening to the distant sounds of the palace breathing, soft footsteps, the low murmur of servants moving carefully, the quiet opening and closing of doors. There was comfort in sameness. Breakfast did not change. It appeared as it always had, carried in with practiced care and placed in the same spot on the same table. The food was warm but unremarkable. It was eaten slowly, sometimes without conversation, sometimes without much thought at all. Time behaved differently during these indoor holidays. It stretched gently, unmeasured and uncounted. Clocks still ticked, but no one listened closely. Hours passed without purpose, and nothing was lost because nothing was expected. A queen might sit by a window, not to look outside, but to watch the light shift across the room. She might turn the pages of a book already read many times, stopping often, not to think, but to rest her eyes. The story mattered less than the act of holding it. The palace itself seemed to understand these moments. Floors did not creak unnecessarily. Hallways remained empty. Even voices softened, as though the walls had quietly requested calm. Servants moved slower, aware that stillness was the true purpose of the day. There were no plans for entertainment. No journeys were imagined. The idea of the holiday existed entirely within the stone walls, inside rooms designed for waiting. Comfort came from predictability, from knowing exactly how the day would unfold, and from knowing that it did not need to unfold into anything at all. As the day continued, nothing important happened. And that was the point. The quiet idea of a royal holiday was never about escape. It was about permission to remain indoors, to do less, to let the world pause gently outside while time passed peacefully within. And so, without announcement or ceremony, the holiday had already begun. Preparing to stay inside required very little effort, yet it was treated with quiet care. Unlike journeys that demanded lists, trunks, and movement, this preparation focused on reducing activity rather than increasing it. The goal was not to add comfort, but to remove disturbance. Everything unnecessary was gently set aside. The palace did not change its appearance in any obvious way. No rooms were redecorated. No furniture was moved. Instead, small adjustments were made that only those living there would notice. A chair was placed closer to a window. A table was cleared of papers that no longer needed attention. Candles were arranged where they might be used later, though there was no urgency to light them. Clothing was chosen with familiarity in mind. Heavier garments were folded away, even if the season had not fully changed. Softer fabrics were placed within easy reach. These clothes were not meant to be seen by others, only to be worn in quiet rooms where appearance mattered very little. Comfort was valued over formality, though nothing appeared informal. Servants prepared as well, though their work became lighter rather than heavier. Tasks were simplified. Movements slowed. Instructions were brief and often unnecessary, as everyone already understood what a period of staying inside required. Silence became part of the routine, observed naturally rather than enforced. Windows were checked, not to be opened wide, but to ensure they closed smoothly. Curtains were adjusted so they could soften the daylight without darkening the rooms too much. The balance between light and shadow mattered more than decoration. A well-lit room encouraged rest without sleep, while a dim room invited the mind to drift. Books were placed nearby, often the same ones that had rested on the same shelves for years. No new titles were requested. Familiar pages felt less demanding. Reading during these indoor days was never about finishing a chapter. It was about the steady rhythm of turning pages and letting words pass without holding on to them. Meals were planned in the simplest way. Dishes that required little attention were preferred. Soups, bread, warm drinks served slowly. There was no interest in variety. Repetition was calming. Knowing what would arrive at the table made the hours feel smoother and less defined. As preparation continued, the palace seemed to settle into itself. Footsteps grew softer. Doors remained closed longer. Even the air felt still, as though it had decided not to move unless asked. There was no signal to mark the beginning of this indoor time. It simply became clear that nothing more needed to be done. By the end of the day, preparation was complete, not because everything was ready, but because there was nothing left to prepare. Staying inside required acceptance rather than action. With surroundings unchanged and expectations lowered, the palace entered a quieter rhythm. The royal holiday did not wait for permission to begin. It arrived naturally, as soon as everyone stopped preparing and allowed stillness to take its place. In distant palaces, drawing the curtains was never done quickly. It was a small action, yet it carried quiet meaning. The curtains did not close to shut the world out completely, but to soften it. They filtered light, slowed time, and signaled that the day required nothing more. Morning light entered the rooms carefully, passing through layers of fabric that had been chosen long ago. The sunlight lost its sharpness, becoming pale and steady as it touched the floors and walls. Shadows stretched gently, without drama, and remained in place longer than expected. Nothing in the room seemed hurried. Curtains were adjusted throughout the day, not out of necessity, but out of habit. A servant might pause, lift the edge of the fabric slightly, and let in a little more light, then step away without comment. The movement was quiet and deliberate, barely noticeable once it was complete. Behind the curtains, life continued at a slower pace. Chairs faced inward rather than toward the windows. Tables were placed where light could reach them without glare. Rooms felt enclosed but not confined, protected from the outside without being separated from it entirely. In these distant palaces, the outside world was acknowledged but not invited in. Weather changed without consequence. Rain tapped softly against glass, wind moved unseen, and clouds passed without being tracked. From behind the curtains, all of this felt distant and unimportant. Kings and queens often sat near these covered windows, not to look beyond them, but to feel the calm created by their presence. The curtains created a sense of boundary, a reminder that nothing outside demanded attention. Inside, everything remained controlled and familiar. The fabric itself carried history. It had been drawn and opened countless times, witnessing years pass without recording them. Its colors had faded slightly, softened by light and time. When moved, it whispered rather than rustled, as though it had learned the language of quiet. Afternoons beneath drawn curtains felt longer. Light faded slowly, and the shift from day to evening was gentle and unmarked. Candles were lit only when needed, and even then, they were allowed to burn steadily without being watched. As evening settled, curtains were left as they were. No one hurried to close them further. Darkness arrived on its own, unannounced and complete. The room adapted without effort, accepting the change as part of its rhythm. In distant palaces, the act of drawing curtains was never about hiding. It was about choosing calm over clarity, softness over brightness. It marked the passage into hours that asked nothing, where stillness became the most valued presence. And so the curtains remained, unmoved and patient, holding the quiet inside while the world beyond continued without notice. The arrival at the summer residence was never sudden. It unfolded gradually, without excitement or ceremony, as though the palace itself was easing into a familiar role. Even when travel was involved, it felt less like a journey and more like a gentle transition from one quiet place to another. Carriages moved slowly along well-known paths. No one urged them forward. The roads had been traveled many times before, and there was no curiosity left in them. Windows remained partially covered, allowing only fragments of the passing landscape to enter. Trees, fields, and stone walls drifted by without being observed closely. When the residence finally came into view, it did not demand attention. Its shape was already known, its position expected. There was no sense of arrival, only a feeling of recognition. The building waited calmly, unchanged since the last visit, as though it had been resting in preparation. Stepping inside required little adjustment. The rooms were arranged just as they had always been. Furniture stood in familiar places, untouched by time or purpose. The air carried a stillness that suggested nothing urgent had happened in the months since it was last occupied. Servants moved quietly, opening doors and setting down belongings without instruction. Trunks were unpacked slowly, often over several days, because there was no reason to hurry. Items were placed where they belonged, not where they might be needed soon. Everything could wait. The summer residence did not feel brighter or more open than the main palace. Its appeal lay in its predictability. Windows overlooked the same views each year, and those views were rarely examined. Curtains softened the light in the same careful way, and shadows fell across the floors in familiar patterns. Meals were taken shortly after arrival, not as a celebration, but as a continuation of routine. The food tasted the same as it always had. Conversation was minimal, carried out only when silence felt too noticeable. Even then, voices remained low and unhurried. Time seemed to slow further within the summer residence. Without the demands of court life, hours expanded quietly. There were no announcements to mark the day. Morning passed into afternoon without distinction, and evening followed without resistance. Rest came easily in these surroundings. Chairs invited sitting. Rooms invited stillness. Doors were closed gently, and footsteps faded quickly into distant hallways. Nothing felt new enough to require attention. The slow arrival was complete not when the journey ended, but when movement stopped entirely. Once everyone settled into the unchanging rhythm of the residence, it became clear that the holiday had begun in earnest. The summer residence did not offer escape or novelty. It offered continuity, calm, and the comfort of knowing that nothing unexpected would happen. Exactly what was desired. Unpacking at the summer residence was not considered a task that needed completion. It was treated as an activity without a clear ending, something that could pause and resume whenever it felt convenient. There was no expectation that everything would be arranged quickly, or even fully. Trunks remained closed for long periods of time. Some were opened on the first day, others much later, and a few not at all. Their presence in the room was accepted without concern. They rested quietly against walls, becoming part of the furniture rather than objects demanding attention. When unpacking did begin, it happened slowly. A single item might be removed, examined briefly, and placed in its usual location. Then the process would stop, often for reasons so small they went unnoticed. A chair invited sitting. A window drew attention. A moment of stillness replaced movement. Clothing was handled carefully but without urgency. Garments were folded and placed into drawers that had waited patiently to receive them. There was no rush to organize by type or purpose. What mattered was familiarity, not efficiency. The same clothing would be worn repeatedly, making thorough arrangement unnecessary. Personal items found their places gradually. A book rested on a table. A writing instrument lay untouched beside it. Small objects carried from one palace to another were set down where they naturally fit, not where they were planned to go. Over time, the room shaped itself. Servants assisted quietly, matching the pace of the household. They moved in and out of rooms without instruction, sensing when to help and when to leave things undisturbed. Their presence was gentle, almost invisible, as though unpacking happened on its own. Time continued to pass without notice. Morning became afternoon during the simple act of opening a drawer or smoothing fabric. The process offered no sense of progress, only continuity. Nothing felt unfinished, even when much remained untouched. Some belongings were intentionally left packed. There was comfort in knowing they existed without being seen. Their absence from the room created no inconvenience. In fact, it added to the simplicity of the space. As days passed, unpacking blended into daily life. Items appeared where they were needed, when they were needed, and not before. There was no moment when the task was declared complete. It simply faded from awareness. Not all rooms in a palace were equal, especially during a royal holiday. Some were avoided entirely, while others were chosen with quiet intention. The rooms selected were not the grandest or the brightest. They were chosen for their silence. These rooms were often set away from main corridors, tucked behind thick stone walls that softened sound. Footsteps from elsewhere in the palace arrived late and faint, if they arrived at all. Doors in these areas were opened less frequently, and when they were, they closed gently, as though aware of the stillness within. Furniture in these rooms was simple and familiar. Chairs were arranged for comfort rather than display. Tables held little more than what was necessary. The absence of decoration made the rooms feel settled, complete without effort. Nothing competed for attention. Light entered quietly. Windows faced directions that avoided direct sunlight, allowing a steady, muted glow to fill the space. Curtains were rarely adjusted once set, as the balance of light and shadow felt correct and did not need improvement. These rooms invited rest without sleep. Sitting felt natural. Remaining still felt acceptable. There was no pressure to speak, to read, or to move. Silence filled the space evenly, without gaps or discomfort. Voices, when used, were low and brief. Conversations rarely continued for long. Words were exchanged only when needed, and even then, they carried little weight. Silence always returned easily, reclaiming its place. Servants knew these rooms well. They entered only when necessary and stayed for as little time as possible. Their movements were careful, their tasks efficient and quiet. Even the sound of fabric brushing against furniture seemed softened. Hours spent in these silent rooms passed unnoticed. Without clocks being watched or schedules being followed, time lost its shape. Afternoon blended into evening without clear boundaries, and the change felt natural rather than deliberate. These rooms became the heart of the holiday. While other parts of the palace existed beyond their walls, little reason was found to visit them. Everything needed was already present: calm air, steady light, and dependable quiet. Choosing rooms for their silence was an unspoken tradition. It required no discussion and no explanation. Everyone understood that rest came not from activity, but from absence, from the removal of sound, movement, and expectation. And within these quiet rooms, the royal holiday continued, supported not by luxury or distraction, but by the steady presence of silence itself. Mornings during the holiday arrived slowly, without instruction or purpose. There were no schedules waiting to be followed, no messages requiring immediate attention. The day began when it chose to, guided only by light entering the room and the quiet sounds of the palace waking on its own. Waking did not lead directly to movement. Remaining still was common, encouraged by the calm that filled the room. Curtains softened the morning light, allowing it to rest gently across the floor. The air felt cool and unchanged, as though it had been waiting. There was no urgency to rise. Time stretched easily in these early hours. Thoughts moved slowly, if they moved at all. The mind did not search for tasks or decisions. It simply observed the quiet, content to remain unoccupied. When movement finally came, it was unhurried. Sitting up, standing, and walking happened without rhythm or expectation. Each action followed the previous one naturally, without prompting. The morning did not demand progress. Breakfast appeared quietly, at a time that felt suitable rather than scheduled. The food was simple and familiar, served warm and without ceremony. It was eaten slowly, sometimes in silence, sometimes accompanied by soft, brief conversation that faded quickly. After breakfast, nothing specific followed. There was no next activity. Chairs invited sitting, and windows invited looking without seeing. Books rested nearby, though opening them was optional. Reading might begin and stop within the same page. Servants moved gently through the palace, adjusting to the pace set by the absence of plans. Their tasks were completed without announcing themselves. Doors opened and closed quietly, leaving the stillness intact. The morning continued without clear direction. Light shifted gradually, signaling the passage of time more reliably than any clock. Shadows changed position, marking hours without naming them. These long mornings did not feel empty. They felt complete. Without plans, there was nothing to interrupt rest. Nothing pulled attention forward or backward. The present moment expanded gently, filling the space. As midday approached, it did so quietly. There was no signal that morning had ended. It simply faded, leaving behind a sense of ease that carried into the rest of the day. In the absence of plans, the morning offered its greatest gift, permission to do nothing, and to do it slowly. Light moved across the floor without drawing attention to itself. It arrived quietly through the windows, softened by curtains and shaped by the angles of the room. There was no single moment when it appeared. It was simply there, resting gently on stone, wood, or carpet. In the morning, the light was pale and narrow. It touched the floor near the window, forming a thin, steady line that seemed content to remain where it was. No one disturbed it. Chairs and tables stayed in place, allowing the light to move on its own terms. As time passed, the light shifted slowly. Its movement was almost unnoticeable unless one remained still long enough to observe it. The line widened, stretched, and gradually crossed the room, marking the hours without sound or signal. Watching this movement required patience, but no effort. Eyes followed the brightness briefly, then rested. The mind did not need to interpret what it saw. The change was gentle and predictable, offering comfort rather than interest. The floor reflected the light differently as it moved. Polished surfaces softened its edges. Worn stone absorbed it quietly. Patterns appeared and disappeared without meaning, leaving no trace once they passed. Occasionally, a shadow crossed the light. A servant moved through a hallway. A curtain shifted slightly. Each interruption was brief, and the light returned to its steady path as though nothing had happened. This slow movement became a quiet focus during the day. It required no decision, no participation. Sitting nearby, one could measure time without acknowledging it, simply by noticing how far the light had traveled. The room itself seemed to respond. As the light moved away from one corner, another became still and dim. The balance of brightness and shadow changed gradually, never demanding adjustment. By afternoon, the light had lost some of its strength. Its color warmed slightly, and its edges softened further. It lingered longer in certain places, as though reluctant to leave. Eventually, the light faded entirely, leaving the floor unchanged. no one marked its departure. Candles were lit only if needed, and even then, their glow did not replace the quiet presence of daylight. Watching light move across the floor offered a simple, complete experience. It filled time without effort and asked nothing in return. In its slow passage, the day continued peacefully, exactly as intended. During the holiday, the servants adjusted to a rhythm that required very little from them. Their work was no longer defined by urgency or anticipation. Instead, it was shaped by waiting, and by the understanding that nothing was expected to happen quickly, or at all. They stood quietly in familiar places, hands folded or resting at their sides. Doors were watched rather than opened. Hallways were observed rather than crossed. Their presence was steady and calm, as though they were part of the building itself. Tasks still existed, but they were smaller and fewer. A tray might be carried from one room to another and then forgotten. A chair might be straightened without reason. These actions filled time gently, without creating progress. Waiting became a skill. Servants learned to recognize when movement was unnecessary. Silence was treated with respect, not as emptiness but as something to be preserved. Even footsteps were measured, placed carefully to avoid drawing attention. Hours passed in this manner, unnoticed and unrecorded. The servants remained attentive without being alert, prepared without expecting instruction. They listened for sounds that rarely came and remained still when nothing followed. When a request did appear, it was simple and unhurried. A cup of tea. A book moved closer. Curtains adjusted slightly. Each task was completed calmly, without conversation, and followed by another period of waiting. The palace felt different during these days. Without constant activity, it seemed to breathe more slowly. Servants adapted naturally, becoming quieter, less visible, more patient. There was no reward for efficiency. Finishing tasks quickly did not lead to new ones. In fact, speed was unnecessary. What mattered was maintaining the atmosphere of calm that surrounded the household. Some servants used the quiet moments to stand by windows, watching the light change outside without focusing on it. Others remained in hallways, aware of the silence and comfortable within it. Waiting for nothing to happen was not boredom. It was purpose without pressure. It allowed time to pass evenly, without interruption. During the quiet hours of a royal holiday, footsteps sounded differently. They were soft, measured, almost invisible, carrying with them no urgency or command. Each step seemed aware of the stillness surrounding it, careful not to disturb the calm that filled the halls. The floors themselves seemed to respond to movement. Stone absorbed some of the weight, wood whispered lightly under careful steps, and carpets muffled even the slightest shuffle. Servants, royals, and occasional visitors all moved in this subdued manner, conscious that noise would break the delicate rhythm of the day. Steps were few, separated by long stretches of silence. When someone crossed a room, it was not with purpose or haste. Chairs were not disturbed, curtains remained in place, and the light continued its slow journey across the floor, unaffected. The sound of each step marked time without announcing it. The gentle cadence of footsteps became a subtle companion for anyone present. It suggested life, yet it asked nothing in return. There was comfort in the movement. It reminded occupants that the household was alive, yet not demanding. The world beyond the walls remained distant, irrelevant to this serene interior. Even small activities, adjusting a book, lifting a cup, or opening a door, produced soft echoes that blended into the overall quiet. The palace seemed to breathe along with these steps, as though the rhythm of movement and silence were one. At times, footsteps would pause. Perhaps a servant had stopped to glance through a window, or a royal had lingered in thought. The pause lasted long enough to notice, yet too gentle to disturb the calm. Then, slowly, movement resumed, repeating the pattern that defined the indoor holiday. No sound was considered unnecessary. Even the smallest shuffle or soft tap contributed to the balance of the day. Yet all noise was restrained, careful, and deliberate, ensuring that the palace itself remained a place of rest rather than activity. By the afternoon, the quiet footsteps had become almost imperceptible, blending with the soft light, the slow movement of curtains, and the muted sounds of the household. They were reminders that life continued gently within, even as nothing pressing demanded attention. The gentle sound of indoor footsteps was a rhythm without hurry, a signal that the day was passing peacefully, and that staying inside could be its own purpose. It was a quiet, comforting measure of time, perfectly suited for the slow pace of a royal holiday. During these quiet indoor holidays, books were opened not for novelty, but for familiarity. The same pages were read again and again, not to learn new things, but to let words settle gently into the mind. There was no urgency to finish a chapter, no desire to discover a surprise. Reading was an act of quiet repetition. A royal might sit in a comfortable chair by a window or near a softly glowing candle. The book rested easily in their hands, its spine familiar from years of gentle use. Eyes followed lines they had already known, pausing often, not to recall meaning, but simply to appreciate the rhythm of the words. Servants occasionally entered the room but made no comment, understanding that reading here was less about knowledge and more about presence. Even if a page was glanced at repeatedly, the act itself provided calm, like the slow movement of light across the floor. Sometimes, the book was set down for long stretches, only to be picked up again later. There was no pressure to continue, no expectation to complete. The same passages could be revisited multiple times, each reading as quiet and unhurried as the last. The words became companions rather than tools. Other books might rest nearby, untouched, chosen for their familiarity rather than intrigue. Pages were smooth and soft, edges worn from prior use. The comfort lay in predictability. The known words required no effort to understand, and they demanded nothing in return. Time passed quietly in this manner. Morning blended into afternoon, and afternoon into evening, while the reader moved slowly through pages they had already read. Even without new content, the act itself brought a sense of order and calm to the day. The repetition of reading created a rhythm that was as much about stillness as about words. It was a quiet anchor in a day without schedules, a simple practice that encouraged the mind to slow and the heart to rest. By the end of the day, the same pages had been read several times, yet no one noticed the repetition. It was not important to keep track. What mattered was the gentle comfort of words repeated, the soft sound of turning pages, and the uninterrupted calm that accompanied them. In reading the same pages again, the royal holiday found one of its quietest pleasures, a sense of continuity, peace, and stillness that required nothing but time and attention. Afternoon tea during a royal holiday was a quiet ritual, carried out with deliberate slowness. The table was set with familiar cups and saucers, polished and arranged without fuss. The steam rose gently from warm liquids, curling lazily into the still air, as if it too wished to move slowly. The tea itself was ordinary, black or herbal, sweetened lightly or left plain. Cakes and biscuits, carefully prepared, were served one at a time, never in a rush. Each bite and sip was taken thoughtfully, with pauses between, allowing the taste to linger without hurry. Conversation, if it occurred at all, was minimal and soft, blending into the calm of the room. Chairs creaked softly as those present adjusted their seating. Napkins were folded and refolded, a gentle movement that required no energy. Even the clinking of spoons against porcelain was restrained, careful not to disturb the slow rhythm of the afternoon. Outside the windows, light shifted imperceptibly. Shadows lengthened, moving across the floor without drawing attention. The tea table became a small center of stillness within the palace, a place where the passing hours could be noted quietly, not measured or recorded. Servants attended with patience, replenishing cups when necessary but never intruding. They moved softly, aware that the act of serving was less about efficiency and more about maintaining the calm. Each step, each gesture, was performed with care, contributing to the gentle atmosphere. Time seemed to stretch during tea. A single cup might last for several minutes, its warmth slowly fading while the person holding it remained seated, relaxed, and unhurried. There was no desire to move on or to finish. The ritual existed entirely in the moment. Reading, listening, or simply gazing out of the window often accompanied tea. The act of drinking became secondary to the comfort of sitting still, surrounded by familiar objects and predictable routines. Even silence felt full and satisfying. As the afternoon progressed, cups were emptied and replaced, yet the rhythm never quickened. The slow movement of hands, the gentle passing of tea, and the unspoken patience of everyone present maintained the same tranquil pace. Afternoon tea taken very slowly was more than a refreshment. It was a meditation in miniature. A daily acknowledgement that nothing needed to be hurried, nothing demanded attention, and nothing mattered more than the quiet passage of time. By the end of the tea, the day felt a little longer, gentler, and calmer. The simple act of drinking slowly had marked the afternoon, leaving those present ready to continue the holiday at its own serene pace. Resting near closed windows became one of the most comforting habits during a royal holiday. The windows were not meant to be open to invite the world in, instead, they kept the outside at a gentle distance, allowing the stillness of the palace to remain undisturbed. Light filtered softly through the panes, falling in calm patches on the floor, walls, and furniture. A chair or a cushioned bench placed nearby offered a perfect spot for quiet contemplation. Royals or attendants might sit there, not to look outside or watch the passing day, but simply to exist in the measured light and cool air. Eyes could close without worry, thoughts could wander slowly, and the body could relax entirely without expectation. The closed windows muted sounds from the outside. Birds sang in a distant garden. A breeze rustled through trees far away. The occasional carriage rolled along a road beyond the walls. All of it reached the room as a faint echo, softened and distant, contributing to the sense of calm rather than distraction. Sometimes, a cup of tea or a book accompanied the resting figure. Sips were taken lazily, pages turned without urgency. Other times, nothing was needed. The act of sitting, of being present in a quiet room near a closed window, was enough. Even silence felt intentional, a companion rather than emptiness. The light shifted imperceptibly as hours passed. Afternoon became evening, and the room changed with it. Shadows stretched and leaned against furniture, forming new shapes that were noticed only briefly. The closed windows held the day at bay, making every moment inside feel steady and slow. Servants passing quietly through the halls respected the tranquility. They did not enter unless necessary, and even small movements were gentle, as if the stillness demanded care. The closed windows marked a boundary between the calm indoors and the world beyond. Even small objects contributed to this comfort. Footstools, cushions, and rugs were all known and expected. They offered support, warmth, or softness precisely when needed. Nothing was unfamiliar. Nothing demanded attention. The placement of furniture also helped define the rhythm of the day. A chair near a window encouraged watching light move across the floor. A table by a fireplace invited cups of tea and gentle conversation. Each piece contributed quietly to the calm, without calling attention to itself. Servants understood the value of these arrangements. They moved carefully around the furniture, knowing that even minor adjustments could disturb the peace. Their respect ensured that the rooms remained exactly as they were meant to be, predictable, calm, and comforting. The comfort of familiar furniture was not about luxury or elegance. It was about stability, routine, and quiet reassurance. In a world where the outside might change unpredictably, these pieces provided continuity and calm. By resting in and among familiar furniture, the residents of the palace experienced one of the simplest joys of a royal holiday, a gentle sense of belonging, a steady rhythm to the day, and the unspoken comfort that comes from knowing the world within these walls required nothing more than patience and presence. During a royal holiday, letters were often begun but rarely completed. A sheet of parchment might rest on a desk for days, inked with careful words that seemed important at the moment, yet gradually lost urgency as time passed. The act of writing itself became more significant than the message it carried. A pen hovered above paper, tracing slow lines as thoughts meandered. Sentences were started, paused, and sometimes abandoned entirely. The writer would set the pen down, glance out a window, and allow the words to remain unfinished. There was no pressure to complete the correspondence. The pause was itself comforting. Some letters contained greetings or observations, others only fragments of ideas. A single paragraph could occupy hours, as attention drifted between the paper and the soft light in the room. Each unfinished letter served as a gentle reminder of thought without obligation, expression without expectation. Ink blotted slowly, drying without hurry. Seals waited unopened in boxes, envelopes stacked carefully, and writing desks remained tidy but ready for whenever, or if ever, the words would be completed. The tools of communication were present, yet their purpose was softened by the stillness of the day. Servants occasionally moved past, aware of the half-written letters, but they did not disturb them. Even when a letter was read aloud or considered, it often returned to the desk unfinished, lingering there as a quiet presence rather than a task demanding attention. Sometimes, the act of beginning a letter was enough. The rhythm of writing. Holding a pen, tracing lines, pausing for thought, became a form of meditation. The content mattered less than the gentle engagement of hand and mind in a calm environment. Hours passed quietly while letters remained in progress. Morning light shifted to afternoon, and the inked words continued to wait patiently. Some letters were never addressed, some never sent, and yet their existence was a comforting part of the holiday's slow rhythm. Writing letters but never finishing them reflected the essence of staying indoors. The act existed for its own sake, not for completion or purpose. It allowed thoughts to be acknowledged without obligation, and time to pass without the pressure of results. By the end of the day, the unfinished letters rested where they were written, a testament to calm, patience, and gentle inactivity. They were reminders that during a royal holiday, some things could remain incomplete without consequence, and that stillness itself was enough. Indoor hours during a royal holiday passed softly, almost imperceptibly. Time had a different quality when measured not by tasks or schedules but by the subtle changes in light, the gentle movements of people, and the quiet rhythm of the palace itself. Each hour slipped by without announcement, leaving a faint trace rather than a mark. Morning shifted to afternoon without fanfare. Sunlight moved gradually across floors and walls, brushing furniture and carpets in its path. Shadows lengthened and softened in equal measure, signaling the passage of time more gently than any clock or bell could. The change was noticed, but it required attention only if desired. Activities were few and unhurried. Tea might be sipped slowly, pages of a familiar book turned without urgency, or a window glanced through without looking for anything in particular. Each small movement contributed to the sense that time was stretching rather than rushing, that hours were to be experienced, not filled. Servants moved quietly in the background, their presence part of the subtle rhythm. Footsteps, the soft shifting of trays, or the occasional adjustment of a curtain provided tiny points of movement amid a largely still environment. These sounds were measured and calm, never disturbing the gentle flow of the day. Even meals became markers of time without demanding attention. Breakfast led into lunch, which led into afternoon tea, each meal unfolding slowly, with no hurry to begin or end. Eating, drinking, and tidying were performed with care, yet required no rush, reinforcing the soft passage of hours. Sometimes, hours passed entirely unnoticed. A royal might sit in a familiar chair, staring at a familiar corner, feeling the day pass through its light and silence. There was no need to mark each moment. Presence itself was enough. Time moved quietly alongside observation, neither demanded nor resisted. Windows filtered the light differently as the day continued. The change was subtle, colors deepened, shadows lengthened, and the air grew slightly cooler. These gentle signs guided the mind toward an awareness of the slow rhythm without insistence or alarm. By evening, the soft passing of indoor hours had created a sense of calm completion. Nothing had been urgent, nothing had demanded more than attention, and yet the day felt full. Time had moved gently, leaving behind a quiet satisfaction. The passage of hours in this manner was a hallmark of a royal holiday, measured, serene, and unhurried. Life inside the palace continued steadily, shaped not by action, but by the simple, unspoken flow of time itself. Rain during a royal holiday was observed rather than endured. From behind glass windows, it became a quiet spectacle, softening the world outside without disturbing the calm indoors. Drops tapped slowly against the panes, each one falling with no hurry, creating a gentle rhythm that matched the pace of the household. The view was never fully taken in. Trees swayed lightly, leaves glistened, and puddles gathered in predictable patterns. Yet the focus was not on observation but on the presence of movement. Rain passing by was a companion to stillness, a reminder that life continued quietly beyond the palace walls. Inside, the atmosphere remained warm and steady. Curtains filtered the dim light, casting pale shadows that danced subtly with each passing cloud. The soft patter of rain blended with the muted sounds of the palace, footsteps, the turning of pages, and occasional whispered conversation, creating a delicate background hum. Royalty or servants might sit near the window, neither seeking entertainment nor engaged in work. Cups of tea rested on tables nearby, steam rising slowly, mirroring the gentle flow of the raindrops. Occasionally, a hand would reach out to touch the glass, feeling the cool wetness without interrupting the calm. Time seemed to stretch while watching the rain. Minutes passed unnoticed, measured only by the slow movement of droplets and the gradual fading of daylight. There was no need to mark the hour. Each drop was a moment in itself, each ripple a quiet signal of continuity. Conversations were rare. When they occurred, they were soft and deliberate, punctuated by pauses that allowed the sound of rain to dominate. Even laughter was tempered, small and restrained, blending into the rhythm rather than breaking it. Some windows remained partially obscured by drawn curtains, allowing only fragments of the storm to be seen. This partial view added to the feeling of safety, of observing without engagement. The weather existed outside; inside, there was stillness, warmth, and quiet presence. By evening, the rain often slowed or stopped, leaving behind a wet but calm world. Yet the sense of tranquility continued. The act of watching, without effort, without urgency, had filled the hours gently, offering a quiet pleasure unique to indoor holidays. Watching rain from behind glass became a practice of patience and calm. It required no action, no decision, no purpose beyond being present. And in that quiet observation, the day passed gently, perfectly suited to the slow rhythm of a royal holiday. During royal holidays, fires were often lit even when warmth was not strictly necessary. The act was less about comfort and more about creating a gentle, steady presence in the room. Flames flickered softly, casting shadows that moved lazily across walls and furniture, offering a quiet companion to the otherwise still day. The fire was never loud or imposing. Logs crackled softly, barely more than a whisper, as embers glowed steadily. The sound was soothing rather than attention-grabbing, filling the room with warmth that was as much mental as physical. One could sit nearby and simply watch, noticing the light shift across polished floors and familiar surfaces. Chairs were placed strategically, not for ceremony but to catch the warmth of the flames. A cup of tea, a book, or a folded blanket might rest close at hand, enhancing the sense of gentle domesticity. Sitting by the fire required no agenda, the act itself was the purpose. Servants tended the flames with care, adding logs or adjusting tools in deliberate, measured movements. Even these small tasks were performed quietly, maintaining the atmosphere of calm. Their attention to detail ensured that the fire existed as a soft presence, never overwhelming the stillness of the room. The fire's glow marked the passage of time as subtly as sunlight. Morning light faded into afternoon, and later, the glow of the flames replaced daylight in a slow transition. Shadows danced in familiar patterns, moving predictably across the room, a silent signal of hours passing gently. Even when the weather was warm and the fire unnecessary, its presence offered a sense of ritual. Lighting a fire was an acknowledgement of the day's quiet rhythm, a way of marking the afternoon without forcing movement or conversation. Its purpose was calm rather than practicality. Sometimes, the fire became a point of observation. Royals or attendants would sit nearby, eyes following the flicker of flames, finding comfort in its steadiness. There was no need to stir or act. Watching the flames was enough, a quiet meditation on light, warmth, and time. As evening approached, the fire was allowed to burn low, embers glowing faintly. Logs cooled slowly, retaining their warmth long after the flames had faded. The room remained gently illuminated, soft shadows lingering even in near darkness. Lighting fires when not needed reflected the spirit of the holiday, creating comfort without urgency, rhythm without obligation, and warmth without demand. In this gentle glow, the day continued its slow, unhurried course, perfectly suited to indoor stillness. During a royal holiday, conversations were often spoken softly and meandered without purpose. Words were exchanged not to resolve issues, give instructions, or provoke thought, but simply to fill space in a calm, gentle way. The goal was not meaning, it was the comfort of speaking and listening without urgency. A discussion might begin with the simplest observation, the movement of light across a table, the sound of rain against a window, or the slow progress of a page being turned. Answers were offered quietly, often with long pauses, and the topic rarely progressed beyond its opening thought. Participants did not hurry to respond. Voices were low and measured, words chosen carefully but lightly. There was no pressure to conclude a point, reach agreement, or continue a narrative. The conversation existed for its own rhythm, not its content. Sometimes a comment would be repeated from earlier in the day, or a question would remain unanswered. No one noticed or minded. These repetitions and unfinished sentences added to the gentle pace, reinforcing the calm rather than disrupting it. Even laughter was small and subdued, a soft acknowledgement of shared presence rather than amusement. Silence followed naturally, and the conversation might resume, pause, or end entirely without ceremony. The ebb and flow of words became part of the room's quiet atmosphere. Servants passing by were aware of these gentle exchanges but did not intrude. They moved slowly, as though respecting the slow rhythm of human interaction, contributing to an environment in which communication was optional, unobtrusive, and lightly threaded through the day. Time passed quietly in these conversations. Morning turned to afternoon, and the words themselves became markers of the day rather than directives or instructions. Each sentence offered a brief connection, while the gaps between them preserved the stillness that defined the holiday. These quiet conversations reminded everyone present that communication did not require purpose. Speaking could simply exist alongside reading, sipping tea, or observing light and shadow. The act of listening and replying became as important as anything said. By evening, the words faded, leaving only the echoes of calm in their place. Conversations that led nowhere were not wasted, they were a gentle accompaniment to the slow, unhurried rhythm of indoor life. They became a small, unobtrusive part of the peace that made a royal holiday what it was. Naps during a royal holiday were long, quiet, and completely without guilt. There was no sense that resting was laziness or that sleep needed justification. Within the soft, still rooms of the palace, closing one's eyes became not only allowed but encouraged, a gentle acknowledgement that time could be spent doing nothing at all. A royal might recline on a familiar chair or chaise, cushions arranged just so, or stretch across a bed already softened by years of use. Even the simplest posture felt comfortable, supported by furniture that seemed to anticipate the body's need for pause. The air was still, the light steady, and the room inviting. Servants moved quietly, aware that any noise could disturb the rest. Footsteps were softer, doors closed slowly, and conversations faded into whispers, or ended entirely. The world outside remained distant and unimportant, allowing the mind to drift without interruption. Naps were often accompanied by subtle markers of time, the movement of light across a floor, the gentle crackle of a fire, or the quiet patter of rain on a windowpane. These signals passed unnoticed, offering rhythm without urgency. Sleep could begin, continue, or end naturally, unmeasured and unobserved. Sometimes, the sleeper would wake briefly, stretch, or adjust a cushion, then return immediately to rest. Even these small movements were unhurried, without pressure or purpose. There was no rush to rise, no expectation to act. The day allowed time to linger in its own slow way. Books, tea, or letters might remain nearby, untouched, as if their presence alone provided reassurance that activity was optional. Napping became an unspoken ritual, part of the gentle flow of hours that defined indoor holidays. By late afternoon, the room felt lighter as sleepers stirred, but the calm remained. Naps taken without guilt left a sense of quiet completion, a subtle pleasure that could not be measured in achievements or deeds. These moments of rest were more than sleep, they were permission, a slow acknowledgement of stillness and comfort. In the act of napping, the palace itself seemed to pause, embracing the unhurried pace that made a royal holiday feel so soft and complete. Time passed slowly, and those who napped emerged refreshed, without haste, ready to continue the day's gentle rhythm, carrying with them the quiet reassurance that doing nothing could be enough. During a royal holiday, daily rituals continued, but not with urgency or pressure. Each action was repeated quietly, steadily, and predictably, forming a gentle rhythm that filled the day without demanding attention. There was comfort in repetition, in knowing that certain things would happen in the same manner, at the same pace, whether anyone noticed or not. Morning routines were slow. Chairs were arranged just so, cups set out for tea, and curtains drawn to catch light at precisely the right angle. Each task was familiar, practiced over years, performed with care rather than haste. The actions were small, simple, yet somehow significant in maintaining the calm of the household. Meals followed predictable patterns. Breakfast, lunch, and tea arrived quietly, served with the same care each time. Food was eaten slowly, utensils replaced gently, and napkins folded or refolded with practiced hands. Each repetition reinforced the quiet order of the day, creating comfort through familiarity rather than novelty. Letters might be begun again, books reread, or fireplaces tended with measured attention. Each act was unhurried, performed not to finish or accomplish, but to maintain the rhythm. Time passed gently between tasks, marked by subtle signals, the movement of light, the soft creak of floorboards, or the flicker of candle flames. Even small chores became rituals. A servant might dust a table in the same way each day, adjust a cushion just so, or sweep the floor with soft, steady strokes. These repeated motions filled empty moments with purpose that was quiet, almost meditative, sustaining the calm of the palace without drawing attention. Conversations, too, followed familiar patterns. Words were exchanged softly, gently, and without pressure, returning naturally to pauses of silence. Each exchange was part of the rhythm, like the turning of pages or the shifting of shadows across a familiar room. The calm repetition of daily rituals created stability. Time was both present and measured, yet it carried no anxiety, no rush, and no expectation. Each act, however small, reminded those in the palace of continuity, of quiet order, and of the gentle pleasure in doing what had been done before, exactly the same way, again and again. By evening, the day felt complete, not because much had been accomplished, but because its familiar pattern had been observed and honored. In the gentle repetition of daily life, the palace achieved a serene, steady pace, perfectly suited to a holiday spent indoors, where time flowed softly and nothing was required beyond presence and patience. During a royal holiday, hallways were crossed slowly, without purpose or urgency. Royals and servants alike moved through the long corridors not to reach a destination, but simply to occupy space, to feel the quiet stretch of the palace beneath their feet, and to maintain a gentle rhythm in the otherwise still day. Steps were soft and measured, echoing faintly against polished floors and stone walls. Each footfall was deliberate yet unhurried, careful not to disturb the calm that filled the halls. The movement itself became the activity, more important than where it led, or if it led anywhere at all. Occasionally, a window at the end of the hallway offered a faint view of gardens or distant trees. Sometimes the walker paused, lightly observing the world beyond the walls, then continued on, leaving the scene unchanged. The hallway existed as a quiet passage, not a route to action. Servants passed each other with similar gentleness, acknowledging one another briefly or not at all. Their measured steps and careful gestures contributed to a shared understanding that motion in itself could be sufficient, that presence was more meaningful than purpose. Small details of the halls became noticed during these walks. Patterns in the floor, faded paint on walls, or the soft glow of a candle sconce drew the eye without demanding attention. Each repetition, each corridor traveled, became part of the day's quiet continuity. Sometimes, these walks led to brief interaction, adjusting a curtain, checking a tray, or moving a chair. Even these small tasks were performed with restraint and care. They were incidental, almost accidental, rather than urgent or necessary. The long hallways, empty or partially filled, became a space for reflection without thought. Moving along them required no decision, no goal. The act of walking itself, steady, soft, and repetitive, was enough to fill time and maintain the calm rhythm of the holiday. By the end of the day, hallways had been walked many times, yet their purpose remained undefined. The movement was quiet, slow, and unhurried, leaving only a faint echo of footsteps and a sense of continuity in a palace at rest. Walking hallways for no reason reflected the essence of staying indoors. Time could pass gently, actions could exist without result, and every step could be part of the peaceful, unhurried flow of a royal holiday. During a royal holiday, the ticking of clocks often replaced music as the quiet companion of indoor hours. Instead of lively melodies or ceremonious fanfares, time was measured softly, rhythmically, and without interruption. Each tick and chime offered a subtle presence, marking moments gently rather than demanding attention. Clocks were numerous and varied, tall grandfather clocks in corners, delicate timepieces on mantelpieces, and small table clocks resting near chairs. Their sounds were understated, precise, and calm, blending into the background of the still household. No one hurried to check the hour, the movement of the hands and the soft resonance of chimes sufficed. Sitting nearby, a royal might close their eyes, sip tea, or reread a familiar page, letting the steady rhythm of the clock set the pace for thought. The measured ticking was unobtrusive, almost meditative, allowing the mind to drift in step with the quiet passage of time. Servants moved carefully around the rooms, conscious of the serenity maintained by these subtle sounds. They spoke rarely, moved softly, and adjusted objects with minimal noise, ensuring the steady cadence of clocks remained unbroken. Even their footsteps seemed to match the gentle tempo of time passing. The absence of music left the household in a quieter, more reflective state. Without melodies to stir emotion or excite attention, the ticking provided rhythm and order without disturbance. It was enough to fill the silence, offering a soft reminder of continuity while asking nothing in return. Afternoon light shifted across floors and walls, and the clocks continued their slow, predictable measure. Even when the day darkened and candles were lit, the ticking remained consistent, a companion for the evening, replacing music with a softer, steadier harmony. Some clocks chimed occasionally, marking hours without ceremony. The sound was not grand, not celebratory. It simply acknowledged the passage of time, as though the palace itself were aware of the slow, careful unfolding of the day. Listening to clocks instead of music became a subtle pleasure, a way of observing life without interruption or expectation. Each tick encouraged patience, each chime reinforced calm, and the day passed gently, its rhythm quiet but perceptible. By nightfall, the steady presence of clocks had marked hours without urgency or stress. In their absence of fanfare, they reminded everyone that time could be appreciated slowly, measured gently, and experienced fully, even in the quietest, most unremarkable moments of a royal holiday. Midday during a royal holiday carried a weight unlike any other hour. The sun reached its highest point, casting light evenly through windows and onto familiar furniture, yet the rooms remained remarkably still. The quiet was thick, as if time itself had slowed to accommodate the calm. Occupants moved little. Chairs held their occupants in place, and even the most restless individuals found themselves lingering, half aware of passing moments. Conversations were brief or non-existent, the hallways echoed faintly with measured footsteps, and the soft creak of doors seemed louder against the pervasive hush. The light filtered through curtains, creating gentle patterns that shifted imperceptibly across floors, walls, and tables. Shadows lay in predictable shapes, stretching lazily and emphasizing the sense of pause that mid-morning had begun and now expanded. The world outside, bustling with life, was held at bay by thick walls and closed windows, leaving only the interior to exist in deliberate quiet. Meals taken around this hour were slow, deliberate affairs. Tea might be sipped over many minutes, cakes nibbled one bite at a time. Even the act of setting down a cup was done with care, producing the softest possible sound to avoid disturbing the pervasive stillness. Servants moved minimally, attending to small, necessary tasks with quiet efficiency. Each step, each gesture, was careful and unhurried, as though the air itself required gentleness. Their presence was almost invisible, blending seamlessly into the calm of the house. Books lay open on tables, letters rested half-written, and fires flickered in their hearths without urgency. Each object contributed to the atmosphere of heavy calm, as if everything within the palace recognized the unique gravity of the hour. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally during midday. Minutes passed without measurement, and yet the day continued steadily, unbroken. Observing the light, hearing the soft movement of others, or simply remaining still became enough to mark the hour. By late afternoon, the heavy stillness gradually softened. Shadows shifted more noticeably, footsteps became slightly more frequent, and voices cautiously returned. Yet the memory of midday's calm lingered, leaving a subtle impression of quiet patience and unhurried existence. The heavy stillness of midday was not oppressive, but steadying. It reminded all within the palace that a royal holiday was not defined by activity or excitement, but by the slow, deliberate passage of time and the comfort found in doing nothing at all. During a royal holiday, meals were taken slowly, deliberately, and in near silence. The clatter of cutlery, the shifting of chairs, and the pouring of tea were subdued, producing only faint, measured sounds that blended seamlessly into the quiet of the room. Eating became less about nourishment and more about maintaining a calm, steady rhythm in the day. Breakfast, lunch, and tea were served at unhurried intervals. Food was simple yet satisfying, presented thoughtfully without ceremony or hurry. Each bite was taken carefully, with pauses in between to allow the flavors to settle and the mind to rest. There was no rush to finish, time was abundant, and patience was expected. Those present often spoke little during meals. When conversation arose, it was soft and meandering, sometimes about the shifting light, the weather, or a familiar memory. Words were not pressed forward, sentences often ended in pauses, allowing silence to fill the spaces between thoughts. The quiet itself became part of the dining experience. Servants moved with care, replenishing cups or removing dishes quietly. Their presence was nearly imperceptible, a soft accompaniment to the slow flow of the meal. Plates and utensils were placed gently, sounds muted, contributing to an atmosphere of peace rather than activity. The rooms themselves seemed to encourage stillness. Light through windows created calm patterns on tables, while familiar furniture provided comfort and stability. Shadows stretched lazily across floors, marking time without urgency. Even the smallest movements, lifting a cup, turning a page, adjusting a napkin, felt deliberate and measured. Occasionally, a glance was cast out of a window or toward a distant corner of the room, but such distractions were brief. Attention returned naturally to the table, to the quiet act of eating, and to the presence of others in the calm. The pace of the meal reflected the pace of the holiday itself, slow, deliberate, and unpressured. By the end of a meal, the room retained a sense of tranquility. Empty cups, half-read letters, and carefully placed dishes became silent witnesses to the calm routine. No one hurried to rise, each person lingered, allowing the gentle rhythm of the day to continue uninterrupted. Meals eaten in near silence were more than sustenance. They were a ritual of patience, quiet observation, and steady comfort. In these unhurried moments, the essence of a royal holiday was fully realized, a life measured not by action, but by the gentle, unbroken flow of time. During a royal holiday, shadows became quiet companions, moving slowly across walls as light shifted throughout the day. They were soft and predictable, cast by windows, furniture, and occasional figures passing through the room. Watching them required no effort, no focus beyond simple observation, yet it offered a subtle pleasure in the calm stillness of indoor life. The changing angle of sunlight or candlelight allowed shadows to stretch, shrink, and shift in gentle patterns. Sometimes they merged with other shadows, forming shapes that were familiar yet fleeting. No interpretation was needed, their slow movement was enough to fill the mind without demanding attention. Royals or attendants might sit near a wall, not reading or writing, but simply letting the patterns pass. Eyes would drift lazily, following the lengthening lines across a carpet, noticing how a chair's shadow fell against a table, or how the fingers of a curtain traced a new shape on the floor. The act of watching became a quiet meditation. Servants moving quietly through the room added to the rhythm. Their silhouettes passed in soft, measured motion, casting brief shadows that merged seamlessly with the existing ones. Even these movements were slow, careful not to disrupt the stillness. As the day progressed, shadows lengthened, softened, and gradually darkened with the fading light. Afternoon became evening, and the room's gentle patterns transformed in slow, imperceptible increments. Each change marked time subtly, without clocks or announcements, blending seamlessly with the calm rhythm of indoor life. Sometimes, one would pause to notice a particularly intricate shadow, a lattice from a window, the outline of a candlestick, or the quiet shape of a folded cushion. Observing these small details required nothing but patience, reinforcing the sense that time could pass slowly, safely, and pleasantly. By evening, shadows had shifted almost completely, settling into the dim glow of lamps or candles. Yet the memory of their movement lingered, a gentle reminder of the slow, quiet passage of the day. Watching shadows had filled hours without effort, offering a quiet, unhurried awareness of space and light. Observing shadows on the walls became a ritual of stillness, a way to notice the subtle changes of time while doing nothing at all. In this gentle attention, the palace, and those within it, continued the serene, deliberate pace that defined a royal holiday spent indoors. During a royal holiday, evenings often arrived quietly, earlier than expected. The light outside softened long before the day felt finished, casting a gentle haze over rooms and hallways. The palace seemed to sense the shift, slowing even further, as if the early descent of dusk required no reaction, only calm observation. Shadows lengthened, stretching across floors and furniture, while the air grew cooler. Candles were lit gradually, not out of necessity, but to ease the transition from day to night. The flickering flames offered warmth and gentle light, blending softly with the remnants of daylight that lingered in corners. Residents of the palace moved more slowly than ever. Chairs were adjusted, blankets folded, cups of tea refilled, but all without urgency. Footsteps echoed faintly in hallways, conversations were hushed, and even the movement of servants seemed subdued, as though recognizing that the day's energy had already begun to wane. The early arrival of evening created a sense of suspended time. There was still daylight outside, yet indoors the world had quieted. Activities, reading, writing, or tending fires, continued, but all were tempered by the understanding that the day was nearing its end, whether anyone was ready or not. Tea tables might be cleared slowly, letters left half-finished, and books closed gently. The soft glow of lamps or fireplace reflected on walls and furniture, offering comfort while signaling that the household was moving toward rest. Even the ticking of clocks seemed to slow in response, their measured rhythm accompanying the early calm. Some wandered the hallways, moved to window seats, or simply remained seated in familiar chairs, observing light fading through panes. The mind, free from demands, could drift easily, as the palace itself seemed to drift toward quiet reflection. By early evening, the world had become muted and still. Even those not yet tired felt a gentle pull toward pause. The early arrival of dusk did not rush anyone. It merely offered a slower, calmer rhythm, a reminder that time could continue without hurry, and that evenings, though early, could be savored in quiet. Evenings that begin too early became an unspoken part of indoor holidays. They marked the day's gentle close, providing space to rest, reflect, or simply sit in stillness, appreciating the slow, deliberate passage of hours without the need for activity or distraction. During a royal holiday, clothing was handled with unusual care, folded slowly and deliberately. Each garment was treated as an object of familiarity and comfort rather than a tool for display or haste. The act of folding itself became a quiet ritual, an unhurried motion that occupied time without pressure or purpose. Robes, coats, and delicate fabrics were smoothed gently across tables or beds. Sleeves were straightened, hems aligned, and layers adjusted carefully. Fingers traced familiar seams, noticing worn edges or soft patches, while the mind remained free to wander in calm reflection. There was no hurry to finish, the rhythm of folding was enough. Servants assisted quietly, moving slowly to avoid disturbing the gentle order of the room. They arranged clothing in neat piles, ensuring that each piece rested exactly as intended. The sound of fabric brushing against fabric became part of the soft background of the palace. A subtle accompaniment to quiet footsteps, ticking clocks, and shifting shadows. Folding garments took time. A robe might be handled multiple times, adjusted here and there, until it lay perfectly aligned. Small gestures, smoothing a collar, tucking a sleeve, straightening a sash, were repeated with patience, emphasizing the care inherent in each motion rather than any practical necessity. Even when clothing was worn again the next day, the act of folding remained meaningful. It marked the attention given to objects long familiar, offered a moment of meditative repetition, and reinforced the calm rhythm of indoor life. Every garment folded slowly contributed to the subtle sense of order and tranquility. Sometimes, a royal would fold their own garments, moving deliberately with quiet concentration. The process became soothing, a small anchor in the gentle flow of the holiday. Folding clothing provided structure without urgency, a minor ritual with no goal beyond the act itself. By the end of the day, piles of neatly folded robes, coats, and fabrics lined tables or shelves, silent witnesses to hours spent in calm attention. The slow folding of royal clothing was more than tidying, it was an exercise in patience, observation, and deliberate stillness. In these quiet moments, the palace maintained its soft rhythm. The slow folding of clothing exemplified the essence of indoor holidays. Time passed gently, actions were unhurried, and every small motion became a comforting part of the day's deliberate, peaceful flow. During a royal holiday, rooms often remained unchanged for days, their familiar furniture and objects untouched, while candlelight offered a soft, steady presence. Flames flickered gently, casting warm shadows on walls, floors, and ceilings, giving life to rooms that otherwise seemed frozen in time. The arrangement of tables, chairs, cushions, and rugs remained constant. Curtains hung in the same folds, books rested in familiar places, and letters or papers were left exactly where they had been. Nothing demanded alteration or attention. The unchanged environment provided a quiet stability that was comforting in its predictability. Candlelight moved slowly across these rooms, filling corners with warmth and highlighting familiar surfaces. Its glow created gentle patterns on polished floors and furniture, adding subtle variation to spaces that otherwise remained static. Shadows danced softly, ever-changing yet entirely safe, offering the faintest motion without disruption. Royals and attendants often lingered in these rooms, not to act or rearrange, but simply to observe and rest. They might sip tea, read familiar pages, or sit quietly by the fire, letting the steady light of the candles shape their experience of the space. The unchanging rooms became a canvas for quiet thought and gentle presence. Servants moved cautiously through the spaces, their steps measured to preserve calm. They might trim a wick, adjust a flame, or dust a surface, but all with deliberate slowness that respected the stillness. Their actions were small, quiet, and barely noticed, blending seamlessly into the steady rhythm of the rooms. Evenings were especially calm. As daylight faded outside, the candlelight grew more prominent, filling the rooms with warmth and soft illumination. Shadows shifted gently as flames flickered, giving the sense of movement in an otherwise constant space. The combination of light and stillness created a subtle intimacy, a gentle acknowledgement of the passage of time without rush. The unchanged rooms, bathed in candlelight, became a place where the mind could rest, thoughts could wander, and the body could pause. The consistency of the space paired with the soft flicker of flames created a quiet meditation on comfort, familiarity, and gentle rhythm. By nightfall, the rooms retained their arrangement, yet the candlelight left a lingering sense of life within them. The unchanging environment, illuminated softly, became a hallmark of a royal holiday. Time passed slowly, actions were calm, and presence was enough to fill each hour with peace. During a royal holiday, nights were not always defined by sleep. Often, occupants remained awake, resting quietly in familiar rooms, aware of the passing hours without moving or speaking. The darkness outside did not demand activity, and the calm interior invited presence rather than action. Chairs, beds, and benches provided gentle support. Royals might recline with eyes closed, listening to faint sounds, distant footsteps, the soft ticking of clocks, or the whisper of curtains stirred by a quiet draft. Even when fully awake, the body remained still, surrendering to rest without the urgency of sleep. Candlelight, moonlight, or embers from a dying fire offered faint illumination, casting long shadows and soft highlights across floors and furniture. The movement of light was slow and predictable, guiding the mind toward a gentle awareness of time without pressure. Conversations were minimal, if they occurred at all. When words were exchanged, they were low, deliberate, and brief, fading quickly into silence. The night became a space for quiet observation, reflection, and the subtle rhythm of breathing, rather than activity. Servants moved softly, only when necessary, mindful not to disturb the stillness. Footsteps were careful, trays adjusted quietly, and tasks performed with restraint. Their presence was nearly imperceptible, adding to the calm rather than interrupting it. The hours of darkness stretched long, but each felt gentle and unhurried. Thoughts drifted freely, attention moved at its own pace, and the body rested even in wakefulness. There was no concern for productivity or measurement, the night existed as an extension of the slow rhythm of the day. Sometimes, those awake would watch shadows shift across walls, listen to the faint crackle of a fire, or trace patterns of moonlight on familiar surfaces. These small observations provided comfort and occupied the mind softly, creating a sense of presence without action. By morning, the night had passed quietly, leaving a sense of calm continuity. Night spent awake but resting reflected the essence of a royal holiday, slow, gentle, and deliberate, where even hours of wakefulness could be serene, and rest did not require sleep. The palace itself seemed to acknowledge the stillness, carrying the soft rhythm of time through each room. In these quiet nights, indoor life proved that even inactivity could be fulfilling, and the passing hours could be gentle, unhurried, and completely enough. During a royal holiday, sleep did not always come quickly. Dreams arrived slowly, unhurried, like gentle tides creeping across the mind. They were not urgent or vivid, but soft, unfolding gradually as the body sank deeper into rest, allowing the mind to wander without expectation. Royals might lie in familiar beds, nestled among cushions and blankets, feeling the steady weight of comfort. Eyes closed, breaths even and calm, the transition from wakefulness to sleep became a quiet ritual in itself. Thoughts drifted freely, unshaped and gentle, until the first faint fragments of dreams appeared. The dreams were never overwhelming. They emerged slowly, sometimes as fleeting images or faint recollections of the day, sometimes as soft imaginings of entirely new scenes. There was no rush to remember them, no pressure to act within them. Each moment of dreaming was gentle, a natural extension of the day's unhurried pace. Candles flickered, shadows shifted, and the occasional creak of a floorboard marked the world outside the mind. These sounds became companions to the slow arrival of dreams, providing rhythm without intrusion. Even distant clocks seemed to tick in harmony with the gradual unfolding of sleep. Servants and attendants continued their quiet work nearby, moving softly and carefully, aware that each step could affect the stillness of the night. Their motions were measured, ensuring that the calm environment supported the gentle arrival of dreams rather than interrupting it. Some dreams were almost imperceptible, remembered only as fleeting impressions upon waking. Others lasted longer, lingering softly without urgency or intensity. Each contributed to a sense of continuity, connecting the slow rhythm of the day with the restful pace of the night. During a royal holiday, waking was gentle and unhurried. There were no pressing tasks, no schedules to follow, and no duties demanding immediate attention. Beds and chairs offered a soft transition from night to day, allowing occupants to rise, or not, at their own pace. By morning, the dreams had carried their gentle messages, leaving the sleeper refreshed but unhurried. There was no need to recount them, analyze them, or act upon them. Their purpose was to accompany the mind through a soft, deliberate rest. Dreams that arrived gradually became part of the essence of a royal holiday, unforced, slow, and deliberate. They reflected the calm indoor pace, offering rest and quiet reflection, reminding all within the palace that even sleep could be a slow, meditative act, unfolding perfectly in its own time. Eyes opened slowly, taking in familiar surroundings. The soft light filtering through curtains, shadows stretching across the floor, and the gentle flicker of candle or firelight lingering from the night. There was no hurry to leave the room, no expectation of movement or action, only the calm presence of the moment. Breakfast might wait, letters might remain unfinished, and the hall stayed quiet. Royals and attendants alike moved deliberately, or lingered in stillness, savoring the freedom of time unclaimed. Even small gestures, like stretching or adjusting a pillow, were taken slowly, without concern for efficiency. Servants moved softly, respecting the unpressured pace. Footsteps were careful, trays shifted gently, and every motion seemed to echo the relaxed rhythm of the household. Their quiet presence reinforced the calm, ensuring that the act of waking remained serene and uninterrupted. Time itself felt different when obligation was absent. Clocks ticked, light shifted, and shadows moved, yet none of it demanded response. Even thoughts drifted at their own pace, meandering without urgency, reflecting the gentle continuity of indoor life. Sometimes, waking without obligation led naturally into quiet rituals, a cup of tea sipped slowly, a book reopened to a familiar page, or a glance out a window at distant gardens. These acts, unhurried and deliberate, provided subtle structure to the day while preserving its calm. By the end of the morning, a sense of calm accomplishment arose, not from tasks completed, but from the freedom to exist without expectation. Waking without obligation became a gentle affirmation that time could belong entirely to oneself, measured only by attention, presence, and the slow rhythm of life indoors. This freedom defined the spirit of a royal holiday, unhurried, deliberate, and calm. Waking without obligation reminded everyone in the palace that time could be gentle, and that the simplest start to the day, without expectation, was itself a quiet luxury worth savoring. During a royal holiday, one day often flowed seamlessly into the next, each morning, afternoon, and evening mirroring the previous in gentle repetition. There was no rush to distinguish one day from another, no urgent events to break the calm, only the slow, deliberate rhythm of indoor life. The same rituals were observed, curtains drawn to catch soft light, tea sipped slowly, letters left half-finished, and furniture arranged just so. Even minor details. The flicker of a candle, the ticking of a clock, the shifting of shadows across the floor, remained familiar and predictable. The repetition became comforting rather than monotonous. Meals arrived with the same quiet cadence, taken in near silence. Steps along hallways were soft and measured, and familiar books were reopened and reread without hurry. Each act repeated itself gently, not out of obligation, but out of the natural rhythm of the day. Servants moved through the palace with practiced care, aware that the steady pace of repetition maintained the calm. Every gesture, from adjusting a cushion to tending a fire, was performed slowly, blending seamlessly into the rhythm of life indoors. Even small movements contributed to the sense that time was passing without interruption or surprise. Conversations followed similar patterns, soft, meandering, and often inconsequential. Letters were begun and left unfinished. Eyes drifted toward windows, observing shadows or rain. Footsteps echoed faintly in hallways. These repeated actions created a world both predictable and soothing, a safe space where nothing demanded attention. The day ended much like it began, shadows lengthened, candlelight flickered softly, and rooms settled into stillness. Sleep arrived gradually, sometimes accompanied by gentle dreams. Nights were spent resting quietly, and mornings returned without hurry or obligation. Another day exactly the same was not dull, it was a refuge. The repeated rhythms allowed the mind to rest, the body to relax, and time to pass gently. Each familiar moment reinforced the calm, teaching patience and the quiet satisfaction of stillness. In this repetition, the essence of a royal holiday was fully realized, a life measured not by events or achievements, but by slow, unbroken continuity. Each day mirrored the last, and in its sameness, there was a perfect, soothing order that filled the palace with quiet contentment. During a royal holiday, one of the greatest pleasures was simply being left alone. Undisturbed moments allowed residents of the palace to exist quietly in familiar rooms, moving little, speaking softly, or doing nothing at all. The world outside could wait, indoors, time belonged entirely to those present. Chairs, benches, and window seats offered gentle support for stillness. Royals and attendants could sit for long stretches without interruption, letting thoughts wander, or not think at all. The calm rhythm of the room, the soft shifting of light and shadow, and the distant ticking of clocks created a quiet environment that encouraged relaxation without expectation. Meals, letters, books, and even the smallest routines were attended to at leisure. Servants moved carefully, mindful not to disturb the serenity, while fires flickered softly and candles cast warm, steady light. Every detail contributed to a sense of stability, reinforcing the pleasure of undisturbed time. Even when the palace was not empty, there was a shared understanding of restraint. Conversations were soft, gestures were measured, and noise was minimized. Movement was deliberate, not hurried, ensuring that each person could enjoy the comfort of peace without interference. The comfort of being undisturbed extended to small, subtle pleasures, observing shadows on walls, listening to the gentle tick of clocks, or feeling the slow passage of sunlight across familiar surfaces. These moments became meditative, filling hours without demanding attention or action. Time itself seemed to stretch more gently when uninterrupted. The day passed quietly, measured by light, the flicker of flames, and faint footsteps. Sleep arrived naturally when desired, and waking required nothing but gentle presence. Each hour flowed softly, unmarked by obligation or pressure. Being undisturbed offered more than quiet, it offered freedom. Freedom from urgency, from expectations, and from the constant pull of tasks or conversation. It allowed the mind to rest, the body to relax, and the spirit to settle comfortably into the steady, unhurried pace of the holiday. By the end of the day, those who had spent hours undisturbed carried with them a deep, subtle satisfaction. The palace, its rooms, its quiet rituals, and its soft light had provided a space where nothing needed to happen, and yet everything felt complete. In this comfort, the essence of a royal holiday was fully realized, gentle, patient, and unhurried. During a royal holiday, time seemed to stretch differently within the palace's thick stone walls. Hours moved slowly, measured not by clocks or duties, but by subtle changes in light, sound, and shadow. The walls themselves, solid and unchanging, created a sense of permanence that made every moment linger longer than it might outside. Sunlight filtered through high windows, brushing floors and furniture with shifting patterns. Shadows grew, receded, and merged, marking the passage of time quietly and naturally. Inside, the day unfolded gently. A cup of tea sipped slowly, a book reread, or a chair adjusted just so. Each small action fit into the measured flow of hours, without hurry or urgency. Servants moved with deliberate care, their soft footsteps echoing faintly through the halls. Tasks were performed without haste, curtains drawn slightly, fires tended with patience, tables dusted lightly. Even these minor activities were absorbed into the steady, stretching rhythm of life within the walls. The thickness of the stone added its own presence. Rooms remained insulated from the wind, rain, and noise of the outside world. The distant echo of hallways, the faint ticking of clocks, or the whisper of conversation was amplified or softened in turns, giving time a tangible weight, a quality that made each hour feel fuller. Meals were taken slowly, often in near silence. Conversations, when they occurred, wandered gently and ended without resolution. The simple acts of reading, walking quietly through hallways, or observing light and shadow became ways of marking time, subtly filling hours without effort. Evenings came softly, arriving without urgency. Candlelight flickered along walls and ceilings, casting long, warm shadows that emphasized the slow passage of the day. Night deepened gradually, and sleep, when it came, was steady and unhurried. Time inside the stone walls was unpressured, yet not stagnant. Each passing hour was noticeable, not by events, but by subtle shifts in light, shadow, and quiet movement. The walls created a cocoon of calm, stretching moments gently, teaching patience, and allowing the day to unfold in a deliberate, serene manner. Within the thick walls of the palace, life moved softly and deliberately. Time stretched, softened, and expanded, offering a profound sense of peace. In this still, measured environment, the essence of a royal holiday, slow, patient, and unhurried, was perfectly preserved. Even as a royal holiday neared its end, preparation to leave was quiet, deliberate, and almost paradoxical, moving toward departure while remaining still. There was no rush, no packing frenzy, only the gentle, measured consideration of what would be taken, what would remain, and how the transition could unfold without disturbing the calm of the day. Garments were gathered slowly, smoothed, and folded carefully. Valises or trunks were opened and arranged with deliberate attention, yet no one hurried to close them or carry them away. Each action was small and precise, like a meditation on order, performed in harmony with the room's stillness rather than against it. Books, letters, and personal objects were considered in turn. Some were set aside, to return to in the future, others were placed neatly into containers for transport. Even in preparation, there was no urgency. Every movement was unhurried, every decision deliberate. The act of preparing became as much about reflection and calm as about leaving. Servants assisted softly, their footsteps barely audible, their motions measured. Trays were moved, fires adjusted, curtains straightened. Every gesture respected the gentle atmosphere, ensuring that preparation itself did not break the quiet flow that had defined the holiday. Light shifted slowly through windows as the day continued, marking the passage of time without interruption. Shadows lengthened across furniture and floors, providing subtle cues of morning fading into afternoon, afternoon into evening. The awareness of time passing reinforced the need for patience rather than haste. Even moments of waiting, pausing to consider what else might be needed, or simply standing quietly in familiar rooms, became part of the ritual. There was no need to act quickly, presence itself was sufficient, allowing the mind to move gradually from rest toward readiness. By the end of the day, preparation had been completed almost without notice. Trunks and garments were ready, rooms remained orderly, and the household maintained its calm. Departure, though impending, had been approached slowly, without disturbance, in perfect harmony with the gentle rhythm of indoor life. Preparing to leave while staying still exemplified the spirit of a royal holiday. Even transition could be measured, deliberate, and calm. Time moved steadily, actions remained unhurried, and the palace held its serene rhythm until the very end. The last mornings of a royal holiday carried a subtle, quiet significance. There was no rush to depart, no urgency to conclude the stay, only the gentle unfolding of familiar routines, observed in slow motion, knowing that soon the stillness of the palace would give way to the world outside. Light filtered through the windows as it had every morning, soft and predictable. Shadows stretched across polished floors, carpets, and furniture, casting gentle patterns that seemed to linger longer than before. Each glance, each breath, was deliberate, allowing the final hours to be savored quietly. Meals were taken with the same care as before, in near silence, with cups and plates moved softly. The taste of tea, the texture of bread, the warmth of the fire. Each detail became more noticeable, a small anchor in the stillness of the day. Even routine actions carried the comfort of repetition, emphasizing the slow rhythm that had defined the holiday. Servants moved gently through the rooms, preparing lightly for departure yet careful not to disturb the calm. Footsteps echoed faintly in hallways, cushions were adjusted, and fires tended with care. Every gesture was measured, honoring the quiet continuity of the palace while hinting at the approaching end of the stay. Conversations, when they occurred, were soft and meandering, often reflecting on the days past. There were no plans for excitement, no discussion of urgent tasks, only gentle acknowledgement of the time spent, and the soft anticipation of the coming transition. Even small acts, such as opening a window to let in the morning air or adjusting a curtain to catch the light, were performed deliberately. Each movement became part of the meditation on stillness, reminding everyone that the final hours could be as gentle and deliberate as any that had come before. By late morning, the palace seemed to hold its breath. The stillness of previous days lingered, enhanced by the knowledge that soon the routine would end. Yet for now, there was only the calm repetition of ritual, the soft passage of time, and the quiet observation of familiar spaces bathed in gentle light. Final indoor mornings were a delicate blend of presence and reflection, the last moments of uninterrupted calm, measured not by duty or action, but by patience, quiet observation, and the steady, gentle rhythm of a royal holiday spent entirely indoors. As the holiday drew to a close, packing became an exercise in patience, precision, and quiet attention. Each item was handled with care, arranged deliberately in trunks or suitcases, and considered thoughtfully before being set aside. There was no rush, only the slow, deliberate rhythm that had defined the entire stay. Robes, coats, and gowns were folded gently, smoothed with careful hands, and stacked in neat layers. Accessories, gloves, handkerchiefs, and ribbons, were tucked precisely, with attention to detail that made the act of packing almost meditative. Every motion was unhurried, as though the items themselves deserved respect for the comfort and familiarity they had provided. Books, letters, and personal effects were sorted slowly. Some were selected to accompany the journey, others remained behind, placed carefully in familiar spots for the next visit. Even small, insignificant objects received attention, their placement a quiet affirmation of order and care. Servants assisted with the same measured precision. Trays were moved, drawers closed gently, and fires attended as needed. Their movements were deliberate, soft, and unobtrusive, blending seamlessly with the calm of the household. Packing became part of the rhythm rather than a disruption to it. Light shifted subtly through windows, marking the passing hours. Shadows lengthened over tables and floors, offering silent reminders of time's slow progress. The gentle illumination highlighted the care with which each item was handled, emphasizing the patience woven into every motion. Conversations, if they occurred, were quiet and brief, often revolving around small details of the packing process or gentle reminiscences of the days spent indoors. Words were soft, almost incidental, leaving space for thought, reflection, and the steady rhythm of careful preparation. By the end of the morning, trunks and suitcases were ready, rooms remained orderly, and the palace retained its serene atmosphere. Packing slowly and carefully allowed the transition from holiday to departure to unfold naturally, without urgency or disturbance. This deliberate approach reflected the essence of a royal holiday. Time moved gently, actions were unhurried, and even the act of leaving could be performed with calm attention and quiet dignity. The process itself became a final meditation on patience, care, and the peaceful rhythm of indoor life. As the holiday neared its end, there were moments spent simply looking back, not at events or accomplishments, but at nothing in particular. Royals and attendants alike paused in familiar rooms, allowing their eyes and thoughts to wander over the quiet spaces they had inhabited, noticing details without purpose or expectation. A chair, a table, a folded robe, each object seemed to carry subtle significance, not because it had changed, but because it had quietly existed alongside them for days. Light shifted slowly across floors and walls, and shadows traced familiar patterns that had become almost companions. Observing them brought a gentle satisfaction, a sense of calm reflection rather than analysis. Even hallways walked countless times, windows glimpsed daily, and fireplaces tended with care became worthy of a slow, appreciative glance. Nothing required attention, no judgments were needed, and no conclusions were drawn. Looking back was an act of presence, a way to honor the quiet rhythm that had shaped the holiday. Servants moved softly in the background, attending to minor tasks with measured care. Their motions added to the sense of continuity rather than distraction. Footsteps, the flicker of candlelight, or the soft hum of distant clocks became part of the reflective ambience, emphasizing the gentle flow of time. This quiet observation allowed the mind to drift freely. Thoughts meandered like shadows along walls, lingering on details noticed days ago or simply appreciating the stillness of the moment. There was no urgency, no need to remember, and no expectation to act, only the calm pleasure of presence. By mid-morning, the act of looking back had become a subtle ritual, a final acknowledgement of the spaces and routines that had filled the holiday. It offered closure not through accomplishment, but through gentle awareness and quiet appreciation of the ordinary. Looking back at nothing in particular exemplified the essence of indoor holidays. A life measured not by events, but by calm observation, patience, and the soft, steady rhythm of time spent without pressure. In these quiet moments, the palace seemed to breathe with those within it, carrying the stillness forward even as departure approached. At last, the royal holiday came to its gentle close. There were no grand farewells, no hurried departures, only the soft acknowledgement that days of stillness, calm, and quiet repetition had ended, and the world beyond the palace walls would soon resume its presence. Rooms, once filled with slow routines and measured activity, remained as they had been, furniture in place, letters half-written, books reopened and closed again, and shadows lingering in familiar corners. The palace held its calm as if preserving the memory of the days spent within, even as travelers prepared to leave. Trunks and garments had been packed carefully, fires attended to, and final glances cast around favorite rooms. Every motion was deliberate, measured, and unhurried. Even the act of leaving was performed gently, without urgency, as though time itself had agreed to move slowly just one last time. Footsteps echoed faintly along hallways, doors closed softly, and the palace's thick stone walls absorbed each motion without complaint. Outside, light shifted, wind stirred, and the distant world awaited, but inside, the quiet lingered. Those who had spent their holiday within these walls carried the rhythm of calm with them, a subtle, unspoken reminder of the luxury of stillness. In the final moments, there was no sense of loss or anxiety. Instead, there was a satisfaction born of patience, observation, and the gentle flow of uninterrupted time. The days had passed quietly, measured not by accomplishments but by the steady presence of those within the rooms, halls, and familiar corners. The end of a very quiet vacation was not dramatic. It was serene, deliberate, and soft, a fitting close to a holiday defined by stillness. Those leaving did so with the calm rhythm of indoor life still in their minds, carrying the slow, unhurried pace forward, even as the world outside demanded a swifter pace. And so, the palace rested once more in quiet anticipation, ready to welcome the next holiday of soft routines, gentle shadows, slow footsteps, and the enduring, comforting rhythm of life lived quietly, indoors, and without urgency.